Right then, guys, welcome to our afternoon session on unlocking the secrets of successful revision and looking in particular at mastering GCSE preparation with me. Okay, so just to let everybody know, this webinar will be recorded and will be shared with anybody who's registered with us for the webinar this evening. Right then, so in our session today, first of all, I'm going to introduce myself. Then we're going to look at the difference between revision and exam preparation. I'm going to share with you some top tips for revision and some top tips for exam preparation, and then take any questions and discussions that you might have. So, who am I? I'm Sam Holyman. I'm actually a science teacher, and indeed, I'm still a full-time science teacher. So I've done a day in the classrooms today. I have over 22 years of experience in the classroom. I did actually train before the turn of the century. I am that old. I've had a great career so far, and hopefully long may it continue. So I've been head of chemistry. I've also had the pleasure of working in state schools as well as private schools and grammar schools. And alongside my teaching experience, I've also had the pleasure of writing textbooks as well, including those for Collins, and some of those I will feature tonight. So the exam years, okay, let's have a look at how we support our exam groups. Now, you may not know this, but there are some things that we are in control of. For example, covering the content of the course. And indeed, the school that I'm in at the moment, we have some building issues, and that's meant that it's been difficult to cover some of the content because we're not in labs at the moment. We also need to prepare the students for the exams and, of course, help the students to manage their time and their stress. So if you wouldn't mind popping any ideas that you have with how you support your students in the exam groups to do better in exams. So I'll just give you a little moment if you wanted to type your thoughts into the chat. That would be gratefully received. Sorry, guys. So when we're supporting the students, I like to think very carefully about the design of our lessons. And now that we're in the run-up to the real exam seasons, I use a lot of starters, so activities when the children come into the lesson to identify any gaps in their knowledge. And really, I want the starters to be the recall of knowledge, focusing on the language that they need to unlock the questions, as well as any ideas in terms of exam technique. I like to use exam questions to relate to content that's been assessed as well. We can also support students with metacognition. So that is the phrase that we often hear at the moment, learning to learn. And one of the great ways that we can do that is modelling how to complete exam questions and supporting students to better understand how to learn effectively, as well, of course, as being their well-being support and reminding them, as some people have said in the chat, about sort of breathing exercises to calm people down, because obviously it's a stressful situation, and reminding our students to look after themselves, eat well, sleep well, and things like that. So I would like to launch my first poll. Please could you answer the question with the poll, okay? Is revision and exam preparation the same thing? Yes, no, or maybe. If you wouldn't mind putting your thought into the ring by clicking the appropriate circle to show me what you would like to answer it as, please. So if everyone could just either tick yes, no, or maybe, just to show your thoughts on whether you think revision and exam prep are the same thing. And if we could have the results, that would be fabulous. If we could share those on the screen. Brilliant. So 11% of our audience think yes, they're the same. 67% say no, and 22% say maybe. So I actually think they are different things. So I think revision is going over material that you've already learned to refresh it in your memory. Usually, students actually use passive revision techniques. So the next question I want to pose is, what are the common pitfalls that students fall into when they are revising? So the pitfalls that I tend to notice is going over the material they already know. So they feel comfortable about it, it makes them feel good, and they just keep going over the same bits of material. Now, the problem with that is that they miss out large sections of the course. So at the moment with my teaching, we have not finished the combined GCSE course yet. I'm teaching chemistry and there's quite a lot of content to go over, and I'm still stuck on the using resources bit, and we're not there yet. However, they are revising for their exams and they keep going over the stuff that they already know rather than backfilling into the bits that we are currently delivering in school. So I'm really mindful of that. And so I do my homework that is reflective of the lessons that I'm currently teaching, and then their own revision time, letting them do the sort of older content. And I think this is quite interesting as well. I think students often confuse recognition with recall. What I mean by that is, if you hear that song or phrase, you're like, oh yeah, I remember the film that goes with. That's recognition. Recall is being able to give word for word almost the salient points. So often students revise and they begin to recognise the material. They know it's science, for example, or English. They know that it's about Jekyll and Hyde, but they can't necessarily give you the facts and the really important key points for that. So we need to ensure that students move from recognising the subject to being able to recall the salient points. And also students often use only passive techniques. So ideally, top tip is that we want to plan revision to ensure coverage of all subjects and all parts of the specification. And we can support our students with planning in that they might not realise that, shock horror, they can actually do work before school as well as in school and after school. And sometimes it can be helpful for them to be given a timetable that they can populate with almost parts of the day with activities to do. So, what's the difference between active and passive revision? Please, can we have the next poll? Brilliant. So, tick all the statements from the list that I've got here, but you believe to be active revision. So we're trying to pick out the active revision bits, please. So if you wouldn't mind ticking those. Okay, and may we have the results, please? I'm not sure I can see the results. If we could have the results, please, that would be great. Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much. So, reading is a passive type of revision if you don't do anything with the material that you've read. Revision cards, certainly that is active. Highlighting, depending on when or how you do it, could be active, could be passive. Typing of notes is most likely to be passive because you're just copying it through. Quizzes, making and doing, of course. Mind maps, making connections and summarising are definitely active. And listening to podcasts and videos are indeed usually very passive. So, what's the difference? It's been shown that passive revision helps to recognise material. Now, I would suggest that the most frequently used type of passive revision is reading. Children often read the notes that they have made, maybe in class, for example. Now, inherently, this can have problems in it because when they wrote the bits down in class, they might not have got an accurate copy of the key information. So it can be a little bit dangerous for them to only use their own initial notes because they can miss out large chunks of important information. And of course, they could have transposed the information incorrectly. Now, active revision has been shown to be much more effective than passive revision. And this is the using and organising of information. Therefore, there is still a space for passive revision, And I like to use things like stealing time. For example, instead of listening to music while you're doing your hair in the morning before school, why not listen to a podcast? Instead of, watching another episode of something on Netflix, why don't you watch a really good quality video on YouTube, like the Cognito series, for example? So that sort of allows you to steal back a little time with the passive revision. But I would encourage the students to move more to the active revision. Now, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Regarding the passive revision, reading of notes, if students can be supplied with notes, or they maybe buy their own books, they can read and then annotate and add extra to the notes, or add post-it notes, for example, or highlight their book with a thematic way of the use of the highlighter. For example, keywords in one colour, key phrases in a different colour, and so on. And then as they're doing that, they need to be looking for themes within the notes and then maybe summarising their notes. So that's how we can move them from doing passive revision to active revision. There is also another barrier that I often find with students, and that is they feel comfortable about passive revision. They feel comfortable about reading their notes and transposing the notes over and over again. So we need them to go on a journey with us to trust us that the active revision will get more bang for their buck, so to speak. So here is one example. This is from my AS level chemistry class, actually, of how I've turned passive to active revision. So this is a set of chemistry notes that I found freely available, and I think they're really, really good. So they don't have copyright, and I've printed them off and I've given them to my students. Now, the colour coding here is in yellow. There is the keyword and definition given to us, actually within the notes. The blue is a keyword that is implied that you should know what it means. So the first task here is I give them the notes and give them the highlighters and ask them to highlight it using that key. Then, when you've done that, any of the keywords that you have noticed that you are expected to just know, so arguably tier 3 words, then to annotate it with the definitions. And those definitions could be out of your own head or from a trusted source, such as a glossary from a textbook. And as you can see there, we've got the annotations on there. Then the last part of this is, as a group, we discuss page by page the definitions and also the tier 3 words and what their definitions are. And as a group, select the most appropriate definitions. Now, in doing this, we are turning that passive revision, reading notes, and turning it into active revision, really diving into the key language. Now, when I first realised there was a substantial word gap, I was not convinced it would be as big as I was led to believe from the research. So this little activity that you see here, I genuinely gave it as a starter to my lesson. And I thought we would be done and dusted within 15 minutes into my lesson. This activity actually took us the entire hour's worth of lesson, because what I hadn't realised is the language that we just use in our lesson to describe things, i.e. the words in blue that you see here, actually they didn't truly understand what they meant. And it chucked out quite a lot of misconceptions that we were able to actually address immediately. So this has become one of my top bits that I like to do with my classes now when we finish a topic. Right, this one is a student's piece of work, okay? And this is a GCSE candidate. It's actually a year 9 candidate. So what they've done is they've revised cells. And as you can see, they've got a number of iterations to which they have done their work. So the green writing was their first attempt. And then they came back to it in a little while. And then you can see that they've added the blue, which was their next attempt. And then they've left it. And then they've come back again. And you can see that they've highlighted what they perceive to be super important bits and bobs onto there. And then they've left it be again and returned to it. And then they've given themselves a little bit of a target, almost really, a smart target of what they think that they need to concentrate on. Now, this is an example of distributed practice. So they've revised the structure of cells in this case, but they've kept chipping away at it, returning to it over time, reflecting on what they've done, adding to it and making changes. So Daisy, just missed one there. Now, this one is another example. This one is an A-level example. You can see the post-it notes there, and those post-it notes are my terrible handwriting. And I have put a little bit of information about the topic on the post-it note. Then on the table, and you can see all the different handwriting in different colours and things like that. These are trying to make connections between each post-it note. And the students are on our desks, we can write on the desk, you can see with the whiteboard pen and easily wipe it off. So the students, you can see there's a pile of books there. They're encouraged to use their books, use discussion, and they can change where they put the post-it notes, of course. They're not fixed on the desk either. So what we're aiming to do here is work as a team and to see all the different connections within a topic and how they relate to each other. And as you can see, when I took this photograph, there are actually 3 post-it notes that have yet to be fitted into the pattern. So sometimes we find that we actually get to a certain point and realise where we've put the connections doesn't allow us to put all the connections, so therefore we start again. So this is really useful for listening in and hearing the dynamics and just pushing them in the right direction by skillfully asking questions to help them realise the links. And this here is an example of an A map. Now, I came across A maps right at the start of my career, about 20 years ago. And I personally don't get on with them very well, but some students, like this student here, really, really enjoy them. So the idea is that each idea has a colour, and that's the primary idea, which, as you can see here, is grey, which in this student's case is energy resources. This falls within the spec of geography, PSHCE and physics. So we've got the energy resources in the middle. Then the main theme comes off that. Now, crucially, it needs to be a wavy line, apparently, to do an A map. And then you write on the line some key phrase. So you can see they've got non-renewable and renewable resources. And then the next idea down, so you're like digging deeper into the concept, you swap for a different colour. So as you can see, they've dug down and they've used the red pen. Then you dig down a little more and you change your colour again, and so on and so forth. I've also seen this AMAP idea using dual coding as well. So with each, and you can see they've tried to do that in the centre where it says energy resources. To me, it looks like a cloud with a lightning bolt, so energy coming from the cloud. So they've tried that dual coding, but over the rest of the diagram, there is less. In fact, there is no dual coding. So some students like to add that. Now this, again, just helps you classify the information in a topic. So it's the broad brushstroke ideas, delving in and in and in. So that's the idea of the AMAP. Right, let's move on to how we identify where to spend our time. So as I said, usually students focus on the stuff that they're comfortable on, and they might actually miss out great swathes of the specification. First of all, it's important to note, you can't, in my opinion, you can't revise something you haven't first learned. So it can be good to do a RAG rating of the spec or give the students an I can sheet and they decide what they can do and they can't do. Any bits that they truly can't do, that needs reteaching really, because if you've never learnt it the first time, you can't revise it. So you might need to, before you start any revision, plug any of those knowledge gaps. But first of all, we need to identify those. So in the chat, could you write any ideas that you currently use with how you identify any gaps in your students' knowledge, please? Before we have a look at some ideas together. Popping in the chat any ideas that you have for sharing how to find gaps in student knowledges. Lovely. Questioning, brilliant. Reflective questions, fabulous. Really nice. And using the student's own work, excellent. So there are some sort of wider issues, because I like to think about it. It's not all about us and all about our students. There can be external pressures that force upon us. So certainly my GCSE year groups at the moment, they've had a bit of a tough time. They've been hit by COVID, so they've been involved in some of the COVID lockdowns, and that has, of course, had some lost learning. We also have, unfortunately, at the moment, many of our colleagues are in schools that have been hit by RAC. That might mean that they've had time out of school, partial timetables. They might, of course, be in temporary classrooms. And also, some students might have had personal circumstances, something like broke a leg, couldn't get up the stairs, therefore couldn't attend any science lessons, for example, because there's no lift in the school. So there was a number of things that it's not about us. These have just happened, but we do need to plug those gaps. So some of those gaps, maybe we need to plug holistically. So for example, the COVID recovery plan, I'm sure that you've been able to identify the topics that have been hit particularly hard, and then we can build that within our normal lessons to plug those gaps. However, for the personal circumstances or the personal learning, I was ill today, so I missed that particular lesson and I never looked at it again. What I like to do is use starters to identify gaps in learning. So I'm a fan of a little A4 whiteboard, low stakes testing essentially, pop on the whiteboard and pop your answers to. I also like little activities whereby it's one thing or another, and on each side of the whiteboard they write, for example, renewable resources, finite resources, and then I just pop up an example and they show me with the board. And it just gives me a bit of a flavour of, do we know this little bit here? Also, we can use quick quizzes to check knowledge as well, and some fabulous ideas coming out in the chat as well. So in the Collins textbooks, there are some QR codes. So this is an example of the complete practice and revise book. And you can see there's a QR code on the top of that page. This page, double page spread here, is the revision notes, if you will. And you can see there, Annie, this is my daughter, and she is actually revising for her GCSEs. She's scanning the QR code there, and it pops up into simple multiple choice questions. And BBC Bitesize have similar as well on their platform. And what I say to students is, have a go at the quiz. If you get 70% or higher, then you can say you've got a good working knowledge of that area. If you get less than 70%, there's some gaps in your knowledge. You need to spend some time going over it. So that's how I like to use some of the quizzes there. So next thing, how does the forgetting curve relate to revision? So you've got a single choice, multiple choice question that's popped up on your screen. Could you tick what you think? How does the forgetting curve relate to revision? If you could pop your choice, that would be great. Okay, may we have the results, please? Brilliant. Okay, so a bit of a mixed bag here. Most people think it's a model that can be used to structure long and short answer revision, and that's absolutely right. So really good. So this here, oops, skipped over a slide. This here is probably a very familiar diagram to us all. So across the bottom is the study interval, so time, and on the y-axis is the retention of information. Now we're making loads of assumptions here, because in reality, students come to us with previous experience. Some of that is formal experience from the classroom, and others are informal experiences, social capital and subject capital. So we're assuming here on day 0, they are a blank canvas. They knew nothing until they arrived, okay? And we can see there that learning something new, as soon as you've delivered that, theoretically, students can replay it very well. However, it just drops out your ears really quickly. And you can see that as it drops down, some of it will stick, but the vast majority will be lost. Now, if you go over it again, you will get the kick up and you will go back to your original retention. So the idea of reviewing things, i.e. revising, is that you stop that decline of retention. Now, this also can be used to think about setting your revision sessions as well. So what we find is when you do a session, let's say a half an hour session, at the start, you remember loads. It then drops. And then when something out of the ordinary happens, a hook, you'll remember the hook. And then it starts to decline again. And then at the end, you'll get a kick up at the end. So it's super important that if you promise yourself to do, let's say 30 minutes revision, that you do the 30 minutes revision. Otherwise, the kick up at the end, you will lose. So that's why it's really important to share with students the metacognition side of things as well. So within our practice in the classroom, what we can do is use starters and plenaries to keep bringing these ideas back into the forefront of the mind, and the more longer term stuff using things like homework and revision for topic tests. So I am a huge fan of contemplating exam technique. In my professional experience, having 2 students with exactly the same knowledge, but one with good exam technique and one with not so good exam technique, there will be a whole grade difference. So I think it's really, really, really important that we train them. Essentially, we're trying to make sure that they understand what the examiner is asking of them, and they can give their answers in the way the examiner is expecting them, so they maximise their attainment. I am a huge fan of Bug. It came across my desk from a colleague in ethics, and it was brought to her attention from the Edexcel exam board. And Bug stands for box the command word, underline the keyword, glance back through the question. And it's a really good methodology to make sure that students fully interact with the rubric of the question, so the information given to them by the examiner. We're also starting to discover, as the field of metacognition is expanding, that modelling is really, really useful. And that is modelling how to attack these exam questions. And also, we should be encouraging our students to do, review, edit, assess. BUG stands for box the command word, underline the key subject keywords, i.e. tier 3 words, and glance back. So, use expert videos to show modelling. So again, looking at the Collins work, they have, again, QR codes, but this time in the exam style questions in their books. And usually in the little QR code, it will give which question is being modelled. And that is by the author usually, reading the question, explaining the command word, explaining any of the keywords and the concepts, and then how to attack the answer to give the examiner exactly what they're expecting to read. So we should be using a mix of past paper questions to jump around the specification as well, so that they're not just funneling in to one particular bit. So here's an example of modelling answers. Okay, so this is looking at separating insoluble solids, sand, from liquids, water. Now, when I gave the students the question, this is a 6-mark exam question from a GCSE, they're actually marked on their ability to use technical language and to have a logical flow of information. Now, even though I'm confident that everyone in that class could separate sand from water, they literally didn't know how to put pen to paper. So what we did is we started off by thinking about something that they're really comfortable with, cooking at home. Peas in your colander that you've boiled your peas for your tea, for example. And you can see there the black text is us as a class writing down how to separate peas from water when you've cooked them for dinner. Then we've overlaid that with, actually, we're not doing peas and water, we're doing sand and water. So what can we swap out? And you can see that with the red. Then the blue is the explanation for why. So what we've done there is we've got a hook with what we're familiar with from our everyday life, moving it into the academic sphere, i.e. the classroom, and then adding the explanation on top of that. And that was left on the board for them to try to write their own answer in that logical response. So here's an example of bugging. This is actually bugging the specification. As you can see, this is a biology example here. So the boxes are going around the command words. And that is the doing words, what we're expecting you to have to do in the exam. Now, each exam board has their own list of command words, and shockingly, even in the same exam board but different specifications, i.e. different subjects, the command word can mean different things. So it is super important that we get the students to understand what that particular examiner is wanting from them. And like I say, all the exam boards pretty much have either in the back of their specifications or on their website the list of the command words for that spec and what they mean. Then we've underlined the key science words in this case, which would be tier 3 words. On top of that, we've annotated even more. So to the command words, we've actually put what they are asking us to do. So recall means you've got to learn it. State means express in clear terms, and you get the idea. And then the underlined words is actually giving you the definitions of what they are so that you can start to understand. So this is an example of bugging the spec, and encourage students to then bug the exam question as well. You could go one step further and use the RAG rating on top of this. So once you have analysed the words, you can then get them to use highlighters, green, yellow, pink, to show green, totally happy with that. Yellow, all right with that. Pink, not a Scooby-Doo. And then the pink stuff we need to reteach. The yellow stuff the students need to revise. The green stuff they're ready to start attacking the exam questions for. Now, this is an example of the children actually having a go at the exam question using what I call the 3-colour technique. So what happens is in black pen, it's closed book. So they're starting the exam questions with whatever they've got in their head and trying to answer it to the best of their ability. Then when they've exhausted that, and can even add a time pressure on that, because usually exam boards want a minute per mark. So you can look at how many marks the whole question is out of, and then set a little timer and set how long you've got, which gives them a bit of a feeling for how long you would have in the exam to do this. Then you get whatever materials you like, textbooks, trusted websites, your own notes, doesn't matter. And in blue, you then change your answers as you so wish. And you take as long as you need to get that right. And finally, you use the mark scheme to assess your work. So what does this tell us? If you got a high scoring mark with the black pen, then you already know it and you understand it. Happy days. You don't need to revise it anymore. You can tick that off as done, move along. If you get it really high in the blue work, but not in the black work, that tells me you totally understand it. Happy days. Now you've got to learn it. So now we need to focus on your revision there because you totally understand it. We just need to get it in your head. If you don't get great marks in either way, that says, okay, you don't understand it. We need to look at what you don't understand about that. And finally, when the students are assessing their work, they can have a look at the answers they've written. Have they written too much? Have they written not enough? Have they got the mark, but actually you could have swapped it out for a better choice of word? So certainly in our specifications, in the mark schemes, you have a first column, which is what the examiner wants to see. And then you have the next column, which is sort of guidance, whereby if you write this, we'll give you the mark. We'd prefer it if you phrase it this way, but we'll give you the mark there. And that usually is when students aren't using tier 3 language and they end up writing far more than they needed to. So that can be a good reflection there. So the last linchpin, I would say, is supporting parents. We can educate our parents on how to help our students to revise a bit better and prepare for exams a bit better, but some parents want even more. So John Tate has been doing From the Sidelines, it's called, which is a video series aimed at parents and helping parents to help their teens get through the exams. Also, Collins have a Facebook and Instagram page, which you can direct your parents to in order to supply support. And there are a series of accessible and engaging bite-sized study videos in the Collins books, which I've already made reference to, which, as I say, I use it in school myself as well. And of course, Collins do have blogs, not just for us as teachers, but also blogs for supporting parents as well. So that might be worth a look, and just sort of earmarking parents into doing that. So, any questions?
Thanks so much, Sam, for that webinar. I found it really interesting, and hopefully, I'm sure everyone else found it really helpful for their teaching. So do you have a question to start us off? Kind of linked to a comment that someone put in the chat earlier, which is, how do you actually persuade your students to do active revision rather than passive?
Yes, it's a hard sell. So I often think that students need to have quite a lot of trust because they've always done it this way. So I think low stakes testing is the way to go. So as a class, each time we have like a low stakes sort of topic test, I try and show a different way of revising and encourage everybody in the room to do that different way of revising. Then when we get the marks in, I like to go around to each student in turn and ask them how they felt it went until they've got this body of evidence to show all the different ways that they're revising. And some will work really well and others won't. And it's giving them the confidence to dump what doesn't work for them, because we're all different. Our brains all work differently, and that's okay. So they kind of need to try it and let go of anything that doesn't work really well. And it takes time. And I think that we should encourage our students in year 11 to chip away at doing a little bit extra what I say to my form groups, I'm a year 11 form tutor, is I say you should be doing 5 extra sessions of 30 minutes per week. And that could be one a day, Monday through to Friday, you've got your weekend off, or it could be on Saturday, you do all 5. It's important that they're in those 30-minute blocks because of how we maintain the information. And it's important to dot around your subjects as well. And they can mix up the types of revision. Now, at this time of year, just after February half term, I encourage my students to stop revising. We're done now. We've got all of our information in our head, and then we flip. And we're flipping to the exam technique. So we squeeze out every mark that we possibly can, encouraging them to not try and do a whole paper and almost brag, I got to the end of a past paper, but to squeeze all the learning out of each question in turn. So that could be a 4-mark question that you spend literally half an hour of your time on because you've used that 3-colour technique. And just keep reinforcing that it's about working smart, not working hard. It's not the hours that you put in, it's the learning you get out of those hours. And they will come round. It just takes time, really. And I think it can be also very helpful to reach out to educate parents as well. So popping things on the old socials and in the school newsletter, just to, you know, back up what you're saying in the classroom. And so they start to hear it from all angles. So I hope that's answered the question.
Yeah, thanks very much. We have a few questions in the chat, so First one is from Kate. Thanks, Kate. What books would you recommend for parents?
Well, I can tell you from first experience, because my Annie's doing her GCSEs and we've had a sample of everything, I can tell you that for free. And the ones that we've got on really, really well with is the Collins practice and revision books. Why? Because you've got those QR codes so you can do the quiz to see, do I need to spend time reading this page? There's also the QR codes that absolutely go through the question to the nth degree. And what I thought was really interesting is school have recommended CGP guides usually because they're normally the cheapest for the school to buy in. And we've, as good parents, we've bought what we've been asked to buy. However, she's gravitated to all of those books, which I've been surprised that she's enjoyed them so much. And all I can say is she is absolutely doing amazingly well. And yes, it's due to her effort that she's putting in, but I do put a lot down to that book because the way it's so exam focused and with that supportive nature of how to tackle the questions, it's paying dividends. So for me, I genuinely think they're the best on the market.
Oh, brilliant. We love to hear that. So, thanks, Sam. So we have a question from Tony. Do you have any ideas on how to motivate resit students?
Oh, that's a tough one. So it's difficult. I mean, I've had a few resit people in my past, and it's hard because often they feel they have to be there because what they want to do later on means they need that GCSE, but they don't want to be there because they've done it all before. So I think what's crucial is that you don't do the same lessons that they would have experienced before. I think that is absolutely crucial. Often resit students as well are normally slightly older than the normal cohort for that qualification. So therefore, sort of moving along a little bit to more sort of self study can be really, really useful. When I last had a resit group, I actually timetabled in my planner of the lessons that I had in a 2-week cycle. One of them, I did what I put in my planner as a coaching lesson. So essentially, I gave every student a task to do that literally didn't require me. And then I asked each child to come to me and we looked at where they were, gave them personal input to sort of push them in the right direction, almost like a very high quality form tutor, to be honest, and giving them personal study advice. And that seemed to really galvanize them because everybody was doing something that was slightly different, but it was right for them. And they started to gain confidence. They felt that I was really invested in them. And that worked really well. So I think the personal touch makes the biggest difference for resit groups. And secondly, devour the examiner's reports. You will probably find trends in your subject of what the students do poorly at or candidates do poorly at, and try and focus on those to try and convert them to getting higher grades rather than concentrating on the content to learn, concentrate on the skills required to convert it into the grade thereafter.
Brilliant. That's really helpful. So we also have a question from Claire. What point in the year do you start revision with your students?
Well, with my GCSE kids at the moment, my chemistry kids, I'm not there yet. We have not finished the course. So what I'm trying to do to support them is, instead of teaching my lessons normally, for want of a better way of phrasing it, I'm using exam questions for them to annotate the rubric to get the notes they need, and then do the question after we've done the annotation to try and speed up that sort of thing. So arguably we're doing that. My homework is all past facing, so that is all sort of revision material essentially. However, with my physics kids, we finished the content 2 weeks ago, so we're flatly on to revision now and doing really well. So what we're doing in my classes there is we're doing a revision technique, and then in one lesson, and then the next lesson we're doing the sister version of that, of its exam prep, and then repeat. With my form group, we are revising in form time every morning before school. So Mondays we're doing types of exam techniques, so really the metacognition side of it. And then we're focusing on maths, English and science. So that's 20 minutes of sort of game time, essentially. In an ideal world, I like to always look back. So as soon as I've taught my first lesson with a GCSE or A-level class, I like to look backwards and pull forwards into the lesson anything I can just to help them make connections, really. So I hope that helps.
Well, thank you. So we've just got one more question. So if anyone else has questions, this is kind of your last chance. Please put them in the chat. So from Grace, we have, do you have any advice for how students can plan a study schedule?
I think they've got to listen to themselves. So I think most people are morning people or evening people. I think very few are all day people. And I think they've got to lean in and maximise where they know that they work best. And then from that, I would recommend little and often. So like I say to the children in my care, I've been recommending since September 5 sessions of half an hour extra every week, no matter what. And now there's no cramming required. We don't need to do any more because we're just ticking along nicely. And that half an hour could be listening to your podcast on the way to school. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a high burden. So yeah, I would recommend little and often. Obviously, we've kind of missed the boat for some students if we haven't done that. And then in which case I would recommend them splitting up their day into portions. So in my mind, you've got the before school, you've got the lunchtime, you've got the immediately after school, and you've got the night time. So therefore shoehorning in those times that suit their learning best. And like I say, really trying for those 5 extra sessions a day.
Great, thank you. So we haven't had any more questions come in, so I think we can wrap up. But if anyone does think of any questions after the webinar, you can get in touch with Sam directly. I'll just pop her contact details in the chat. And yeah, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar along with the slides so you can share them with your colleagues kind of within the next week. Yeah, I hope you found this webinar useful, and please do let us know if you have any questions afterwards. Yeah, and thanks, Sam, so much for putting on this webinar for us.
Thank you ever so much for joining me, everyone, and have a great evening.